All right, as everybody's coming in, we have a couple things that we'd like to do. First, if you had a question written down, Mr. Michael here is going to be the one collecting them. He's our moderator for the Q&A session this evening. If anyone needs some more time to write it down on a piece of paper, let me know. We can also kind of collect them as we're going through, as we kind of get started. I just kind of maybe hold it up. I'll collect it and give it to him. He's going to be mixing it in, so you don't have to worry about that. Somebody said they prefer just to ask the question out loud. If the providers are okay with that, I'm okay with that. And we just want to make sure all three of us are on the three groups are on the same page. The second thing is we're going to have Miss Mariola give a little health nugget before we get in. We haven't got to hear a lot from her yet. She's going to shine more tomorrow and tonight, but I wanted to let her be able to share a health nugget.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm Mariola, and I'm part of the Q&A panel, but I was thinking I haven't really shared much, but this is a little advertisement so that you can come tomorrow for the wrapping of the program. I'm going to be talking a little bit about how to support someone that is mentally ill, and also talk about my personal story on burnout and why I believe so much in mental health. And I believe that mental health is, actually burnout is something that we need to talk more about it because it's been recently considered a mental health syndrome. So hopefully I'll see you guys tomorrow as well. But I just wanted to share and first start with the concept of gratitude. Aren't you grateful for being here? Amen. Aren't you grateful for Sabbath? Aren't you grateful for what Dr. Bainas and Amanda has shared? Yeah, so did you know that the more things that we find to be grateful make us even more grateful? It's amazing, but it has this a special effect that the more we practice gratitude, the more possibilities we see around us. Do you know how many thoughts we think a day? Take a guess. I think Amanda has given that away, hasn't she? Yeah, from how many? Yeah, and how many of these are negative? Do you remember the percentage? How much? Oh, you didn't? Okay, so I get to share something new. So 85% of these thoughts are negative. And do you know how much percentage of that percentage is repetitive? Take a guess. 90%. What does that tell us about our brains and about us as human beings? We are pretty negative human beings, right? We tend to look at what's missing, what we're lacking, what's negative, right? That's our default. And this is why it's so important for us to practice mental health weightlifting, right? And to be intentional in looking into what do we have? And the positivity, right? This is why I like prayer so much. It really opens up our minds into what's available, right? So the more we practice gratitude, the bigger the opportunities are. The bigger the growth for us is available. So I just want to practice this, take a few minutes so that you can also get involved and not just sitting there listening to all of us talking, but really practicing this. So I'm going to talk about we're going to practice the power of 5. So let's pick someone in the room that we don't know, someone that we don't know, that we haven't talked to before. And let's share 3 things we're grateful for, and then 2 things that we've been challenged with this last week. And let's try to reframe, using what Amanda shared with us, the negative into positive using gratitude. Does that make sense? Am I making sense? Yeah? So we're going to share 3 things we're grateful for and 2 things that were challenging that now we can reframe through finding in what way did it help us with gratitude. Yeah, and we're going to share it. We're going to take 5 minutes. Is that okay? Can you help me with the time? 5 minutes with someone that we don't know. Ready? Okay, let's start. Okay, we're gonna get started. Let's get back to our places. All right. So, how did it go? Did you enjoy the little practice? Yeah? It's amazing, but when we feel depleted or negative, we can always access this fantastic tool of gratitude and just think about, even in the most challenging moments, there's something to be grateful for. And by shifting into that mindset, our day can change. So we don't need to wait for New Year resolutions or for your birthday. We can shift into change every second of our day if we practice these little things. So the more we practice it, the better we get, to the point that our brain just does it naturally. And how nice it is to hear someone that is positive, right? Someone that is grateful. It really adds value in our relationships as we cultivate connection. So thank you for participating, and now we're opening up for our Q&A.
Before we do that, let's start with prayer. Father in heaven, as we take this time to answer questions, we ask for your Spirit, and we want to acknowledge you as the true answer, and we ask for your Spirit to be here, and we want all the answers ultimately to be pointed to you. Help us in a very special way to connect and to be able to provide some sort of solutions. And we again thank you for the Sabbath and the chance to be able to fellowship with one another. In Jesus' name, amen. By the way, if you have questions still, you can still write them down and get them to Pastor Jared, and I'll make sure that I hopefully can fit them in. What I did is I was able to put the questions into categories. Many of you had similar questions, and so I put them in some of the categories. I want to start with this question because I think that all three of you can answer this, or because the three of you have a very specific role. And in fact, just to recap, for those of you who maybe are joining us, maybe if three of you can just introduce yourself real quick and what you do at Beautiful Minds.
Mariola, and I'm a life and health coach.
I'm Amanda Anguish, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and in the mornings I do the intensive outpatient program, or IOP as we call it, and then in the afternoons I see individuals, couples, families, and all that sort of thing.
And I'm Daniel Binus, and I'm a psychiatrist, so I do holistic treatment plans, medication management, and participate also in the intensive outpatient program.
All right. So the first question is, should everyone see a mental health professional, in parentheses, even if you are not anxious or depressed? Related question, should all couples get marriage counseling?
The answer to the first question, no. And the second question, yes, but you don't necessarily have to go to a therapist. Sometimes really wise, experienced people in your life can do that work too. So you don't have to go to a therapist. And no, I don't think it's necessary to go to a mental health professional if you're not dealing with struggles. So I'll let Mariola answer her answer that she's.
I want to supplement Amanda's answer because I believe that having a mental health expert or a coach or a professional to walk alongside in your experience will only make you and help you live and navigate life more effectively. So I think it's always helpful to keep your psyche in check when you have someone that can help you with your mental health brain. So it would be more of a mental health gym to go and see a professional.
We just need to be very careful which professional we might choose, because research does show that we start to adopt the value system of the therapist that we go see. doesn't mean that, if the therapist is an atheist, we're going to stop believing in God overnight. But we have to be careful of a lot of the subtle influences, right? So, when you're going to see a therapist or a psychiatrist or even doing coaching, there's going to be a lot of subtle things that come in that will start influencing us, and we're becoming very vulnerable, with those people. So we do want to guard our hearts. So that is the one caveat there.
One more thing just to add to what people are saying. One thing we like to do at Beautiful Minds is we have this saying, we're moving the stigma. And what that simply means is we want seeing a mental health professional to be, in a sense, the norm, not to be, oh, this person is crazy per se. There's these labels and mindsets, unfortunately, that we have. And so there's a treatment plan we have at Beautiful Minds called Survive, Revive, and Thrive. And so for some of you, you might be doing well and not be struggling so much with clinical depression. And so perhaps seeing a therapist like Amanda is not where, you could see yourself. However, we can all improve in some way, shape, form. And so that's where we have a coach. And a coach can help you reach certain goals in your relationship or in your job, your professional life, spiritually even. And so regarding the question that was asked, obviously, we don't want to just say everyone needs to see a mental health professional. And the word for that, when you define mental health professional, usually people are saying therapists and psychiatrists. But we also want people to understand that there are resources that we have at Beautiful Minds, such as we have a podcast. We have webinars. We have ways that you can still educate yourself in the field without per se seeing an actual professional. Go ahead.
To what Dr. Binus said too, because somebody in the mental health profession can be of a certain mindset, sometimes it is healthy because maybe you don't have healthy people in your life too, so that can be encouraging you in the right direction if you find the right person.
Yes. Good.
Some of my patients are like that.
All right, so these next questions are for Dr. Binus. They are medication related. I'm going to read a couple of them because that way you could probably incorporate some of these. Is there ever a situation where medications are needed? If so, what does that look like? The next question is, what do you think of SSRIs? And what are some side effects from medications?
Well, if we started with the last question, we might be here all night because, I don't know if any of you have ever looked at the scare sheets on the, that's what a lot of my patients call them, the scare sheets on the medications, but they can have so many different potential side effects. Now, granted, most of those side effects don't happen in people, otherwise these drugs would not be allowed ever to come to market, but there are rare and often dangerous side effects. So, we do want to minimize the use. However, there are situations where medication, I believe, can be helpful and even important. There's times where I've worked with people, and at least from appearances, it seems like they really are trying, or they have tried in the past, to implement some of the therapy or lifestyle changes, but they just really seem extremely stuck. So sometimes those are situations. Now, the argument on the other side of that is, well, did they really have the full support they needed to really implement that? And the answer often is no. Maybe if they would have had a full-on team, like kind of forcing them to get, hydrotherapy and the right nutrition and all of this, then maybe it could have kind of gotten them out of that hole. But most people, due to cost or access to care, don't have the luxury of having that much of a full team to kind of jumpstart them. So in some of those sorts of situations, an antidepressant can sometimes help get them going. And the way I think about it is, it's kind of like, if you break your leg, what do you need? You need a cast, right? And so you put the cast on the leg to help to hold the leg in place so that what can happen? So that it can heal, right? Now, does the cast do the healing? No. In the same way, the medication can kind of stabilize people's brains, at least to some degree, so that you can actually start doing the things, cooperating with the natural principles so that your brain can start to heal. You can start to build healthier pathways. But then as your brain becomes healthier, just like you wouldn't want to leave a cast on your leg forever, the goal is to try to get that cast off and also get off medication, or at least minimize medication. So, whether it's SSR, like antidepressant medications, yeah, sometimes those can be useful and helpful. But again, they don't heal. God's nature heals through God's methods. And so we want to, even if people are on medication, we really want to promote those holistic methods so that the brain, the body can start to heal itself, so that over time we can taper medication down, minimize medication. Some people do need to stay on medication longer term. There are also more difficult conditions that are more strongly genetic and biological. Not that anxiety and depression don't have biological components, but they're not as strongly biological. And what am I talking about there? I'm talking about bipolar, especially severe bipolar, like with psychosis and this sort of thing, or schizophrenia, some OCD type pictures. These sort of, especially the more psychotic type of disorders, often do really struggle significantly when they're not on medication. Now, that being said, I've also seen data that, over time, the outcomes are similar, in people medicated or non-medicated. But then in practice, when I've tried to take people off medication and they have schizophrenia or something like that, I've really struggled, as far as like, it often does not, even if after a few months, I'm like, okay, I hope things are going to get better. But, so I try to be judicious and careful with that. Again, there's things that I think God wants us to learn and to grow in as far as our understanding of applying natural means, even in those settings. But up to this point, I can't pretend that I have the answers, for all of those. So I think there are settings where medication can be beneficial, because in the end, in my mind, at least, the goal is not to be medication free, but that's great if that happens, don't get me wrong. But the bigger goal is to optimize quality of life and the potential for quality of life, and, especially the ability to connect with God and with other people. I mean, that's what life's all about.
Thank you. A related question to that is, what supplements would you recommend for depression or anxiety, if any, instead of medication?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because there are a lot of different supplements that can be beneficial. One of the most common ones that I use and can jumpstart people really quickly is called SAMe, S-adenosyl methionine. And usually, I start with around 400 milligrams, but you can go higher than that. But that's just a simple example. There's so many other things that have been shown to have some efficacy. There's not always super strong data, but some of the other ones that we sometimes might consider would be a combination of like tryptophan and even tryptophan containing foods, B vitamins, magnesium, even things like saffron extract. So the list kind of goes on, and sometimes it can be challenging to even figure out where you start. So there are occasions where I will, especially if someone's really open and interested in doing more of a holistic approach, that we do what we might call a bit of epigenetic testing, if you will, where Dr. Bill Walsh, he's a researcher who has done some research on epigenetics, and so we do at times do his panel, and so we'll check for like copper levels, zinc levels, et cetera, and whole blood histamine. And so this helps us to see whether someone is what we call an overmethylator or an undermethylator, and then based on those results, we can then do more rational supplementation with different things like zinc and vitamin B6 and sometimes folate and this sort of thing. But there's no one size fits all, and that's what makes it sometimes challenging. And then there's a whole host of supplements that are often helpful for anxiety as well. We actually have an anti-anxiety product that we've put together that has like magnesium and inositol, L-theanine. So there is more and more research showing, especially when you combine some of these things that are helpful, that it is often very useful. And I tell my patients that take our relaxation powder, hey, you got to take it regularly, just like a medication. And usually after a week or two, it really starts kicking in more. And eventually we're planning on, coming out with more supplements, because we want to do as much of the holistic, even, through food, et cetera, as we can. But we also realize that some people need some extra support from the supplements. And that's why we're coming up with more products that could help to minimize our use of medications. The next product that we want to come up with is to help people to think more clearly, focus better. So that would be, hopefully for some people, a replacement of their ADD medication, for example. And then eventually we want to come out with one for depression. So there are some good supplements out there, and we're working on putting some more of those together.
Next question. Speak to the health message from the mental health perspective at the layman level. We are all so unqualified and complex. It's so great. So how can we be mental health advocates when we're not trained?
Well, I think it's interesting how many of the things we've learned in the health message are actually being supported by the research now. So if you know something is being talked about in, Spirit of Prophecy or the health message, go out there and find research that backs it up. Because right now, honestly, there's so much research out there that contradicts each other. Sometimes I laugh and I think, okay, where do you start? Because this one says this is good for you, and then this one says, no, it's not good for you. So let's just start with the Bible and the health message, and then find the research that supports that, and then share that with people. Because some people, they will listen to the Bible, they will listen to the health message, but some people won't, and they'll only listen to the research. So go and find the research that backs up what we already know, and then share that with the people who wouldn't hear it otherwise.
Next question. How good is the PHQ-9 survey in diagnosing depression?
I'm sorry?
The PHQ-9 survey,
Oh, okay.
Is that something you can trust? Does Beautiful Minds use it? How good is the PHQ-9 survey in diagnosing someone's depression?
I'd say it's pretty decent. The PHQ-9 really focuses more on the physical symptoms of depression. It asks questions like, how do you have low energy? How's your concentration? How's your sleep? This sort of thing. And so the tricky part there is sometimes people can have low energy, poor concentration, poor sleep, even from physical health issues, right? So any kind of test like that, you always have to contextualize. It's not for diagnostic purposes. It's a questionnaire to help understand what kind of symptoms someone is having, but we need to contextualize that in their lives and what else they're experiencing. And that helps us to substantiate or debunk the diagnosis of major depression. And any of those diagnostic tests have been validated with research, so there is good support for them, but we always have to contextualize the questionnaires. So whether that's the GAD-7, or which is for anxiety, or other, even Beck hopelessness or Beck depression inventory. Although I will say with the Beck ones, they're really focusing more on thoughts. So in a lot of ways, that probably is a more accurate measure of actual depression, because if people are having really negative thoughts, generally speaking, that's a pretty good picture, I think, that they're depressed. Amanda agrees.
All right, the next one is geared towards young people. What would be some ways to reach young adults, specifically in the area of mental health, or if they're struggling with depression? And the other question that's related is, how can we help some of these young people to have positive thinking, to find their calling? How can we empower them as a church?
Come to my talk tomorrow.
All right, yeah, and I'll add, because I don't think I'm going to be talking. I'm going to be talking more on screens, but it probably goes kind of along with it. But the research shows that the most important factor in mental health outcomes for adolescents is having a committed adult involved in a committed, healthy adult involved in their life, to mentor them and to show interest in them and to be there for them. This is the most important. So, and it's interesting because it actually shows that the most important factor for outcomes with mental health for adolescents is self-control, self-regulation. But in order to get there, that's where they need the committed, stable adult to be involved in their lives to actually help them to exercise self-control, because adolescents don't naturally do that very well, because they're more into taking risks and exploring things and pushing the boundaries, etc. So that's huge. And one thing we can do as a church family is to be intentional with reaching out and seeing how our young people are doing, and then getting them involved. And not just getting them involved in youth ministry, because guess what happens? When we just have them involved in youth ministry, when they're done with their youth ministry, then it's almost like they feel like they're graduating from church, So we have to be careful. Like, I'm not saying don't get them involved in youth ministry, but also think about other things they can get involved with too. And we want to channel their creative energy, give them an opportunity to have a voice and to be part of what's going on in church.
I'll add to that too. One thing that I've noticed is adult interaction, but one-on-one adult interaction. Because oftentimes, you can go, oh, well, I'm around my kids and everything, but you're not actually giving them that one-on-one attention. And I don't mean where you're telling them to clean their room or to get their homework done or something like that, where you actually take pleasure in them, in getting to know them. And here's a game you can play with a young person that doesn't sound like a game. And by the way, you can also do this with your spouse or a friend, is ask a question about anything that you might be interested in, and the rule is you can't follow it up with a statement. You can only follow it up with a question. So if I were to ask you, what's your favorite car? And you say a Ford F-150 or something like that. My next response is, well, last week you said you wanted a sports car. The next question instead should be something along the lines of, oh, what color would you like that F-150 to be? And then they answer. And then you ask another question. What you're doing is you're getting to their heart. You're showing that you're interested in learning about them. And ironically, when you say, oh, well, I thought you wanted a sports car last week, you're already jumping ahead and you're not giving them the opportunity to say, actually, I changed my mind. I want a sports car instead. But you didn't tell them that. They came to it on their own, and you get to learn about them, and they learn about themselves as they get there. So you have to be extremely patient and reserve judgment in that time of just taking pleasure in getting to know their heart.
Next question is, how do I not lose my desire for church or God if I've had something traumatic happen at church?
Well, spiritual things are spiritually discerned, and recognizing where that came from first. Who wants us to be disinterested in church? So what do you think he's going to do to make sure that happens? Do all kinds of really heinous things to us or have us see these things done where? Can God introduce unhealthy people to us in church? Yeah, we can meet all kinds of unhealthy people in church. And in fact, what better place to go where it should be safe? Where do perpetrators hang out of child abuse? Church, elementary schools. So if Satan really wants to hurt people, where is he going to send hurtful people? To church is one of them. But what can God do with us if we stay in church? We can be the help to the people who might be hurt. If all the healthy people leave, what happens to all of the innocent people, the naive people, the people who might be hurt one day? Who are they going to talk to? Who's going to relate to what they're going through with them and lead them in a healthy direction? I don't want to leave church. If that's the best thing that I can do in church, even if I didn't like the sermons or whatever, if I could be there and just be a support to people who need somebody to be healthy in church, that's where I want to be. But there's a lot of good stuff that happens at church. Some of the healthiest people are also at church too. So I want to be around where those people are as well. But I do know that Satan's going to introduce unhealthy people to us through church because he wants to mess up anything good, especially that's of God too. So, yeah.
A good sermon that I've heard was actually just this past ASI. My friend Rebecca Wong, she actually was very open and transparent at ASI, how she experienced trauma in the church and working for the church. And I was looking for it on the Audioverse or ASI website. I couldn't find it, but she also gave the presentation at the Open Door Church. So it's on opendoorsda.com, and it's called The Power of Transformation, The Art of Transformation, the Art of Transformation. And she goes through how she experienced abuse and trauma in the church and how she overcame, and seeing a mental health professional was part of that journey, and a few other things as well. So if you want, again, that resource, you can come to me after this Q&A.
Yeah, and one thing I might just add too is, it's normal to have some really negative feelings about a person or a situation, like a church situation, if there's been trauma that has happened there. Now, that being said, you don't want to, you want to make sure you're going to be safe and not re-traumatized, but to just run the other direction and not go could actually in the long run worsen the trauma. And because you're essentially, if you were here during my talk this morning, one of the things that we find with the dogs that were stressed out and decompensated is that they had to be re-exposed to stress, and so they had a sense of mastery. Okay, well now, even though I'm dealing with stress and difficulty, I'm not re-victimized. And so that's really important that you actually allow yourself. We even call this exposure therapy. In an appropriate way to expose ourselves to what might be kind of scary or uncomfortable, but in a healthy way where we're getting the support and we have the tools to deal with the uncomfortable emotions that are coming up. So now we're developing a sense of mastery so that we're no longer a victim, but like Amanda said earlier, we're a victor in those situations. So yeah, it is going to be normal for some negative feelings to come up, but over time, those feelings can start to change.
This is related to the traumas. This is from someone in their mid-50s. I have never dealt with childhood traumas that are still affecting my life today. Do you have a suggestion as to how I go about with this? Who do I talk to? What does this process look like?
Well, I would definitely find a biblical Christian counselor who's trained in trauma to talk to. And yeah, that's a good place to start. But another thing said too is Satan wants us to hide as though when we've been hurt, there's something wrong with us. And oftentimes that lie keeps us in a cycle of sabotaging ourselves rather than when we talk about things, that truth actually sets us free. But the truth doesn't often get heard in isolation. And so sometimes sharing the truth with somebody else that you trust, that you know that is going to give you good, sound feedback or advice, can be a very healthy way to be set free from the lies that you believe within that abuse too, because I've never heard of any kind of abuse that didn't come with a lot of lies as well. And yeah.
Yeah, I really agree with what Amanda's saying. I mean, it's so important to get some support working through that process, because if we try to do it all on our own, oftentimes it can get really confusing and overwhelming. And it needs to be someone that's not just supportive, but also has some skill in the process. Because if we're opening up about these things and someone doesn't really know how to deal with that, sometimes it can almost be re-traumatizing, which, you know, frankly, is one of the biggest challenges, like having biblical mental health counselors like Amanda and coaches like Mariola, et cetera, because it's hard to find. And so this is where, you know, we really want to see more people trained to support others. Sometimes we can't find the exact counselor that would be ideal or whatever, but I do believe that God does have other people that maybe aren't trained by, you know, professional schools, but also have been maybe trained directly by him in life experience, you know, and some of these individuals can walk alongside. One thing that often does help, and again, getting support to do this is important, is what we call developing a cohesive narrative. And so essentially what you're doing there is you're writing a story that makes sense about your life. And you start with, you know, kind of your earliest memories, and you start writing down about what you experienced early on in life, and then you write about your traumas, and through that process you actually start figuring out, okay, well, this is what these traumas led me to believe, and this is what the good parts led me to believe. And so basically you're seeing, you know, how your early life experiences shaped your psyche, shaped your belief system, and then you start sorting out, well, what's the truth and what's the lies? And through that process, you can really start seeing, like, okay, well, now I need to be careful because I'm prone to buying into these lies, and I need to guard against that. And as part of that whole process, forgiveness is also hugely important too, because then you often start identifying, like, ooh, you know, I have bitterness against this person and a lot of resentment towards this person because of what they did. And so again, you know, these are things that can be done, but best done under the guidance of someone who knows what they're doing.
Some specific questions. Other than prayer, how can we help someone who is so depressed and given up on everything in life? He won't take advice from his mental health workers. He is severely underweight. He suffers in sleep, suicide. He calls the suicide hotlines. How can we help someone like this?
I'm going to take a wild guess, and the first thing after you've been praying, obviously, and maybe even reading a book on depression and how to help somebody, a good Christian book, by the way, I'm going to suggest turn off the internet. Because most people who are in that position are probably overindulging in maybe video games, pornography, too much television binge watching, all kinds of things. And that person will hate you for turning off the internet. And you might hate you because that means you don't have access to the internet. But if you really care about this person, their hatred of you will last for a very insignificant amount of time compared with the growth that will come from turning the internet off. So I'm going to take a wild guess and just assume that is part of the problem.
And then, in addition to that, I think that one of the best ways to support someone, and we're going to talk about this with Amanda tomorrow, but it's really understanding what mental illness is and really getting trained. And there's a lot of resources out there, like the Mental Health First Aid course, for example, that really teaches us how to approach the person based on what we're seeing. And here is where the Holy Spirit can really give us the insight on how to speak hope, how to develop trust, and create a safe environment for the person to open up. And hopefully we can be that bridge to steer them to getting the help they need.
Yeah, people are generally not going to change until, of course, there needs to be an element of support and knowing that they're cared for. But sometimes that's the only side of it that takes place. And that is very important. I'm not trying to minimize that. But we also want to take a look at, in change, often change is hard. And so people are usually not going to change until the staying the same becomes so uncomfortable that it's actually more uncomfortable to stay the same than to change. Does that make sense? And so sometimes we need to take a look at, well, what's in my power here, to a legal degree, right? That I can do potentially to make this person kind of uncomfortable. And I'm not talking about in a mean way, right? But am I doing something that is enabling them to stay the same? And that's where sometimes we really have to put up some healthy boundaries, whether it's turning off the internet or whatever it might be. Maybe stop providing them with financial support, whatever it might be, that will put them in a position where they're more open to seeking help.
Next question. My loved one has schizophrenia. How can we help him as he struggles with anxiety? We've tried everything, distractions, medications, prayer. What can we do to help?
Yeah, schizophrenia can be one of the most difficult disorders to treat. But I will say that, again, the best approach is always going to be a holistic one. So spiritual, yes. Medication as appropriate. Nutritional, exercise, etc. One of the interesting things is we have noticed that intensive hydrotherapy, hot and cold treatments, believe it or not, often do have a very significant impact on the intensity of hallucinations. And so this is an additional benefit. Also, like I mentioned earlier, the Walsh protocol, I have seen that helpful for some people, this epigenetic testing I was talking about. So this is something that could at times be quite helpful. And then there are, potentially other rational supplementation that could be looked at, maybe medication changes, yeah, I'd probably leave it at that.
There's one other thing that I've seen work. We're outpatient, but I've seen work in inpatient, and that is getting the person outside working, like on a farm or in nature, doing manual labor. That seems to be really, really helpful. And I've seen two individuals. We worked with these two individuals for a very short period of time, 10 days, so it wasn't enough to get the full effect, I believe, but to see them out working on a farm and doing manual labor, man, not only were they happier, but they were clear-minded, even while still having some of the symptoms of that. But it was enough for the parents when they came back to get their sons, because these are both males, that they were like, wow, we see such a change. And we were thinking, wow, we haven't cured these individuals yet, or, should we, keep them longer? But the parents were so excited to see them actually look them in the eyes And they were a lot clearer in their thinking too. And only after 10 days of having that manual labor, being out in nature and working. And I think one of the things we had them do is like picking up rocks and moving them. So it wasn't anything ridiculous. It was just they were outside and doing something. Because when you're left with your thoughts alone, man, that's a really difficult place to be. So any distraction from that is really helpful.
Another situation. If your loved one triggers an event that activates stress on you, how do you forget or resolve and move on?
Well, I don't think the goal is to forget. Maybe somewhat move on at some point. But when things happen, I think it's important to address it. We don't want to just gloss over it and pretend it doesn't happen. And sometimes it's hard to have a conversation about something. It's hard to, directly look at the problem with another individual. But even starting with talking about it can help you see things sometimes differently than you thought they were, and help you uncover more evidences to have a healthier perspective on it. But I don't think, God forgives and forgets maybe, but there's a reason why we don't forget, so we don't walk ourselves into the same problems over and over and over again. So I don't think the goal is to forget, but maybe have a healthier mindset about it after you do the work.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and just say that it helps us to know where our boundaries, our trust level can be with that person, and we shouldn't just pretend that everything's okay, but we want to be assertive, in our communication rather than passive or passive aggressive. And that's really important in addressing that issue as appropriate in, an appropriate way, but in a straightforward manner. And then realizing that we do want to forgive so that we don't harbor resentment. But I love the saying that forgiveness is given, but trust is what? Earned, right? So just because we forgive somebody and we move forward in our lives, that doesn't mean we trust that individual until they've earned back our trust. And I think that's important when it comes to relationships.
I just want to also add to the point of being triggered, right? When we're triggered, it's not a good time to address a conversation or share. But actually what I tell my clients when we talk about being triggered is take an active pause and really go out, take your thoughts on a walk, go and exercise, have a nature bath, like really indulge in nature in any way you have access to. And that will also help you organize your thoughts so that you can come back and have more of a constructive conversation and hopefully resolve.
Another situation, if a person's anxiety and depression are situational because a person has several traumas that has happened to them, what is recommended to help the person to keep their sanity, not knowing how long it will take for the situation to resolve? Yeah, if a person's
Four traumas going on right now, all at the same time. How does a person keep their sanity while waiting for all of those things to resolve, not knowing how long it's going to take to resolve them? What does that look like? If there's no therapist involved, but some of the other things are in place: diet, exercise, Bible, God, good healthy reading, but still in the midst of trying to keep depression and anxiety at bay, because 4 traumas at one time is almost just too much for anybody. So, yeah.
My first inclination is to pray with you, because I'm limited in offering you any real support in that, because I know only God has the strength and power to support you through what you're going through. And I also want to cry with you because I'm feeling kind of emotional. You want to say something real quick?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, these sorts of situations are extremely difficult. And there's, from time to time, it just seems like life throws everything at us. And so, yeah, we can only imagine, what you're going through right now. But I think it's really important to not just try to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and do it on your own. I think that's, from what I'm hearing, I don't know how much support you have, but I heard you mention a lot of these good things, and they're good and they're important. But how much support from other people do you really have? That would be one key. And again, maybe part of that support needs to be a professional right now to get some extra guidance through this chapter. But yeah, I think it'd be very appropriate. We'd love to maybe pray with you afterwards and do what we can to support you right now too.
Yeah, I think what he said is really helpful. And sometimes there are support groups for whatever you might be going through that you might want to look into. And it might be kind of scary to go to random people that you don't even know to get support from. But I see this every day in my group where people are afraid to come to group, and then they leave 3 weeks later going, wow, I don't want to leave. This has been so special to see other people who are going through the same thing, and I feel so connected to them so fast, as scared as I was going in there in the first place. So just having people by you and supporting you, not so much because they're giving you advice and stuff, but because you see, wow, this person is maybe 5 years ahead of me in their experience with this, and oh, maybe that's what it'll look like for me coming out of it as well. Or, oh, this person is at the very beginning, and wow, look how far I've come since I was in that place too, and maybe it will be okay. And just hearing how other people, it can be really helpful. So if that's something that, depending on what those traumas are that you're experiencing.
I know it is 6:30 now. I don't know if we want to go ahead and wrap it up, or if there's
Just a couple more.
Okay,
is what
2 more.
Jared
Okay.
said. How does one overcome betrayal and resentment without being pessimistic?
My first thought is, how did Jesus overcome betrayal? And I'm picturing him, in the Garden of Gethsemane, experiencing betrayal. I'm picturing him on the cross. And why did he do that? Because many of us would experience betrayal too. And sometimes betrayal is in the form of someone you love that's hurt you or rejected you or walked away from you. And I've actually contemplated this before, how, if there's any pure example of unrequited love, it's the love that Jesus has for all of us, and how many of us have rejected that. And so if we go through those things, how much must he understand what I'm going through and what I've experienced and the pain and heartache that I'm feeling right now. And that reminds me of the hymn, "Oh yes, he cares, I know he cares. His heart is touched with my grief."
Yeah, and I really appreciate what Amanda's saying there as far as, the example of Jesus, because I think one of the main examples I think about is how he worked with Peter, and Peter clearly rejected him, denied him, mistreated Jesus, but Jesus did forgive him. And then I think about, the way the Roman soldiers crucified Jesus, and Jesus forgave them too. Now, it was interesting when you look at the words that he actually said. He said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And I think that's a prayer and something we need to say sometimes too, and saying, "Lord, I don't have it in me to forgive, but I'm giving you permission to forgive in and through me." And I think giving God that that permission can start a process in our own hearts as we pray for that individual, et cetera. So forgiveness is important. But then again, when you look at how Jesus dealt with Peter, it was not immediate trust of Peter again. Remember, by the sea, after he had breakfast with the disciples there, there was a process that Peter had to go through to essentially, and Jesus knew what was in his heart, but Jesus was asking him these questions to kind of essentially help him to see more clearly what was in his heart and essentially to confess, Jesus, you know all things. You know that I'm trying to love you, but I'm not able to love you the way that you love me, essentially, is what Peter said when you really look at that. And he was a humbled man. He was no longer, this outspoken, oh yeah, I love you, Jesus, and I'm going to die for you kind of person. He was like, Jesus, you know. And so through that process, he actually earned Jesus's trust back, And again, also when we've been hurt by somebody, yes, we need to forgive, but we need to practice good boundaries, and they need to earn the trust back.
Last question. What should I do? I feel sad and I feel alone.
I think the best thing right now is when you feel alone to recognize the potential, because sometimes feeling alone and focusing on that causes us to isolate even more, and it makes us more attractive to Satan's lies that he wants to keep telling us. But this is the time that you should reach out and find the safest, healthiest person that you can imagine to reach out to. And even if it might be a stranger, but you just see that, wow, the way they live their lives seems like they care. I'm just going to reach out to that person. Because oftentimes our feelings can be quite convincing, but that's not necessarily reflective of the hope that we have when we do reach out and we make ourselves available to not feel sad and alone.
Yeah, and I think we do want to go back to what Amanda talked about earlier this afternoon with the reframing element, right? We want to look at how truthful and helpful, are my beliefs right now. So I feel alone. Am I really alone, or is that how I feel? So, so first we need to kind of look at the accuracy of some of what we're feeling, because sometimes our feelings often lie to us. And let's say that it is actually pretty accurate that we're alone. Then we want to look at, okay, well, are there things that I can go about to potentially change that? One thing, and Amanda talks about this with the 5 Ps, is that oftentimes when we feel sad or alone and we just say, well, this kind of defines me, then we almost can set ourselves up, and I'm not saying you're doing this, whoever did this question, right? But sometimes this can be the case, and this is why it's so important to kind of break all of this down and look at the underlying issues happening. Sometimes we can set the stage to stay alone because maybe we're making choices, like we're not willing to kind of venture out because of our own insecurities or reach out to other people, even though there are people that want to support and be there, because our belief is that people aren't going to be there, or they're going to reject me, or whatever the belief might be. We shut down and we make it impossible for people to actually connect with us, even though we think it's their issue. Maybe a big part of it is actually our own issue. And so this is why it's so important there's not an easy answer here, because you'd really have to dissect, like, what's really going on there. There's so many things that can cause those feelings, even physical stuff too, like poor nutrition, etc. And we have to look at all those things. It has to be a holistic approach. And then, because that's just the fruit, right? We have to dig deeper to the root and then take care of those issues so that the fruit, the feelings, can start to change.
I also want to add that we are this reminder that we've been built, we've been created beautifully, and a lot of the emotions that we don't like actually have a purpose. They are a gift for us to really see and assess what's working, what's not, and what needs to be done differently so that those negative emotions can drive me towards behavior that will bring about that joy.
Just a quick story related to what Amanda said. I remember a group of us were playing tennis about 2 years ago, and we were teaching someone how to play tennis, and they hit the ball over the fence, and I was like, oh, really? I have to get it? And when I went to get the ball, I'll never forget this. This girl came up to me, and she said, I feel alone, and I feel sad, and your group looks happy. Can I join your group? And this was a pretty profound experience because a lot of us were, from different churches in the area, and we all just wanted to get some exercise. And it turns out that this individual, her name is Samantha, she ended up becoming friends with many of us, getting Bible studies, and becoming a baptized member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And it was because she had the courage, in a sense, to realize, I don't have anyone, but these people look friendly. Let me talk to them. And she talked to us, and it was, now we consider her a friend. She's on the chat, and now she moved to another area outside of Sacramento, and she texted us and said, I'm looking for another Seventh-day Adventist group there, where she moved to. And so it's a pretty amazing story, and one that Amanda reminded me of because she didn't have any friends. She felt alone, but she put herself out there and tried looking for people who looked friendly and who would accept her in. And that's what the church is for. That's why we exist. So, anyways, Pastor Jared, thank you again for having us.
Thank you for taking time to answer those questions. And thank you all for sharing those questions. I hope that each of you were able to take home something to help answer maybe something you might be struggling with, or something that you know somebody is. And at the very least, hopefully you now know some techniques to be even healthier, even if you didn't have issues. But either way it goes, I pray you have been blessed today. I want to let you know that tomorrow morning we have Media in the Brain, Restrain and Retrain Yourself, the do's and don'ts of supporting someone with mental illness and burnout, the new mental health syndrome. You're not going to want to miss any of them. And we also, again, just in case you missed it earlier, we have a brunch for you, kind of almost like a buffet breakfast for you. You can eat it when you first come in if you want, or if you don't like eating at 9:30 and you like eating at 10:30, you can eat it then. It's going to be available for the morning session there. And we will be meeting in the fellowship hall where the refreshments were this evening. That's where the meeting will be tomorrow. But again, I want to thank you for coming. The Beautiful Minds team is going to be here for a little bit longer, so if a few of you wanted to, like you mentioned, to have prayer or had a question, you can do that. But let's try to let them at least get out at least a reasonable hour so they can get some sleep as well and be fresh for tomorrow. But again, thank you for sharing with us today. It's been a blessing for me. Thank you for coming, and God bless you and have a great evening. Thank you.